I'm Michelle Reyes. I'm from the Philippines and I work in oceanography. I'm a researcher in the Philippines where I come from. Since there's so much coastline, 60% of the population is dependent on fish for protein. So in a country of about 100 million people, that's a lot of people. So I think when we try to address problems like with the fishing communities, for example, it has to be a little bit more holistic. It can't just be climate change. Or sometimes we use an approach that doesn't really mention climate change in particular, but we try to explain it to them more in terms that they understand. Because sometimes when we approach it as a climate change problem, they're saying, climate change, what's that to me? Climate change. You keep explaining that it's a global thing, and here I am. I'm in this small town, and I'm just fishing a few kilos a day. What's that to me? So we have to kind of package it in a way so maybe it doesn't sound like a climate change project when even if we're trying to address that. So we have the added problem of the fishermen in general or fishing communities having no marketable skills. So we owe the success stories that I know, I can tell you about two of them. Mostly are shifts from fishing to tourism, because then you don't really need a college degree to bring a person around, show a person around your area or something like that, or to come up with a small business maybe that sells food to tourists or something like that. One is on Apo Island. I think it's a very well publicized marine sanctuary where they first started the community-based thing, where the community gets involved with the management of their resources. And as I said, it's not specifically targeted to climate change, but it's in there. I mean, they feel the effects every day, so it's the same thing. So yeah, they manage the tourists. Some of the fishermen have become tour guides and that sort of thing. And then they created marine protected areas. We have what they call the Bantay Dagat, which are the volunteers that kind of police the areas. It's almost like a pseudo police type of job when you're a Bantay Dagat. And so they get a little bit of income from that. It's not perfect. They've felt the effects of climate change because Apo Island was just devastated by a typhoon maybe 2-3 years ago, and it was so bad they had to transfer the marine protected area because the MPA was just wiped out. So yeah, it's not climate change proof, but they at least did something. There's another area, for example, called Oslob, where they have whale sharks. They got the idea of giving the sharks food so they would stay around because of the natural life cycle, it would have been a seasonal thing. Now it's a all year round thing to have whale sharks there and for tourists to come and see the whale sharks because they started giving food. And I mean, if you're very purist kind of scientist or whatever, it might bother you a little bit that you're kind of changing the natural cycle of things, and we don't know how that's going to cascade into other stuff in the future. But from the point of view of the fishermen, it's much better. It's a much more steady source of income because as fishermen, it depends on a lot of things whether they get catch or not. It changes from day to day. This is a more steady sort of thing, and they don't have to go very far because they know it's kind of a repetitive thing. They go to the same areas. They know what to do, and so it's a bit more reliable. So from their point of view, it's a good thing. Maybe from the scientific, not so much. But like, how do you judge? Like, I can't judge it. It's putting food on their table, and I have no other solution for that in that situation. The same, because it's the same thing, fishermen and fishing families with no marketable skills. So, how do you judge something like that? So yeah, like I said, success story, depending on your point of view. There's very little artisanal fishing left. The hook and line, the small boats. It used to be in the Philippines, wherever you went, the boats were different. They looked very unique, and they had their own kinds of sails and their own kinds of outriggers based on what the water was like. If just very rough or not, you would see the difference in how the boats were constructed. And then, so you have things like hook and line, maybe. They can't compete anymore. That's the bottom line. In the words of one of the fishermen that I asked, he said, when the commercial boat passes by, there's nothing left for us. So, and the artisanal type of fishing doesn't help. It doesn't help them compete. Hook and line, they have to use nets where they can get them. They have to try to get bigger boats. I've seen them more now kind of cooperate with each other to get bigger boats, and a group of them will go out, use the nets, come back and kind of divide whatever they catch. Instead of before, when it was a little bit more small boats, 2 or 3 people, and each one has his own thing going. So I think that's probably because of the inability to compete. Now they have to go farther to get the fish there, because the nearshore areas just don't have any fish anymore. And also, again, the balance of what's good for whom is they create there's a law now that says that 10% of the marine waters of every municipality has to be set aside as a protected area. The science behind it isn't like perfect or anything. No, they don't really have guidelines on where to put the marine protected areas, and whether or not you have a reef or whatever, you have to protect 10% of the waters. And in some cases, especially in the really small municipalities, it means they have to go farther to fish.